Poor girl recognizes George Strait at the mall. What happened next touched the world. What happened that cold December afternoon at North Star Mall would forever change the life of an 8-year-old girl who had been sleeping in a car for months. But nobody could have predicted that the man who would transform her destiny was casually walking past the food court, wearing nothing more than a simple Stetson hat and sunglasses, trying to blend in with the holiday shoppers like any other grandfather buying Christmas presents. The scent of cinnamon rolls and coffee filled the air as families rushed through the bustling corridors of San Antonio's most popular shopping center. Children's laughter echoed off the high ceilings while parents juggled shopping bags and tried to keep their little ones from running toward the giant Christmas tree that dominated the central plaza. It was the kind of scene that painted the perfect picture of American holiday tradition, warm, joyful, and filled with the promise of magical moments. But tucked away in a corner booth near the McDonald's, far from the cheerful chaos, sat a thin woman with tired eyes and calloused hands, wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Amanda Campbell stared at the $23.47 laid out on the plastic table before her, counting and recounting the bills and coins as if somehow the mathematics might change in her favor. Next to the money sat a small notebook, its pages worn from constant handling, filled with carefully written song lyrics in a child's handwriting. "Mama, can we stay a little longer?" The soft voice belonged to Lily Campbell, an 8-year-old girl whose bright blue eyes seemed too large for her pale, thin face. She wore a faded t-shirt featuring the face of a man in a cowboy hat, George Strait, the king of country music, and despite the shirt being 2 sizes too big, she wore it with the pride of someone displaying their most treasured possession. Amanda looked at her daughter and felt her heart break a little more. They had been living in their 1998 Honda Civic for 3 months now, ever since the eviction notice had been served and the last of her late husband's military benefits had run out. Each night brought a new parking lot, a new place to call home for 8 hours before moving on to avoid drawing attention from security guards or police officers who might ask uncomfortable questions. "Just a few more minutes, baby," Amanda whispered, reaching across to smooth down Lily's unruly blonde hair. "We need to let other families use the table. But before you hear what happened next, I want you to know that this story will touch your heart in ways you never expected. If you're watching from your living room in Miami, your kitchen in Denver, or anywhere else in this beautiful country of ours, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're joining us from today. Your support means the world to us, and I promise this story will remind you why sometimes the most extraordinary moments come from the most ordinary encounters. Lily clutched her precious notebook closer to her chest. Inside those pages were the lyrics to 47 George Strait songs, each one copied by hand during the quiet hours when her mother worked her evening shift at the diner. The notebook had become her escape, her companion during the long nights. When the car grew cold and scary, sounds came from the darkness outside. She would whisper the words to Amarillo Morning or All My Exes Live in Texas, and somehow the music made her feel less afraid, less alone. "Mama, do you think we'll ever see him in person?" Lily asked, tracing her finger over George Strait's face on her shirt. "Do you think he knows that his songs help little girls who don't have houses?" Amanda's throat tightened. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that concert tickets cost more than a week's worth of groceries? How do you tell your daughter that the man whose music has become her lifeline probably lives in a world so different from theirs that he might as well be on another planet? "Maybe someday, sweetheart," Amanda managed, though she wondered if that someday would ever come. 3 tables away, a man in his early 70s adjusted his sunglasses and pulled his Stetson hat lower over his eyes. George Harvey Strait Sr. had mastered the art of moving through public spaces without being recognized, a skill developed over 4 decades of being one of the most successful country music artists in history. With 60 number-one hits and over 70 million albums sold worldwide, he could afford to shop at the most exclusive stores in Texas. But something about the simple pleasure of walking through a regular mall during Christmas season always appealed to him. He had already purchased matching toy horses for his 2 youngest grandsons and was considering a delicate silver bracelet he had seen at Kay Jewelers for his granddaughter when something caught his attention. A small voice, barely audible above the mall's ambient noise, was singing. George paused, tilting his head to listen more carefully. The voice was young, sweet, and unmistakably singing one of his songs. But it wasn't just any song. It was "I Cross My Heart," one of his most personal compositions, a song he had written thinking about his own family, his own promises to the people he loved most. Following the sound, his eyes settled on the corner booth where Amanda and Lily sat. The little girl was singing softly to herself, her finger tracing the words in her notebook, while her mother stared at the money on the table with an expression that George recognized immediately. He had grown up in a small town in Texas, had seen that look on his own mother's face during the lean years when his father struggled to make ends meet on a cattle ranch that barely produced enough income to feed the family. As George watched, a mall security guard approached the mother and daughter's table. The guard, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a badge that read "Supervisor," looked down at Amanda and Lily with obvious disapproval. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you and your daughter to move along," the guard said loudly enough that other customers turned to stare. "This eating area is for paying customers only, and you've been nursing that one coffee for over an hour." Amanda's face flushed red with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, we were just warming up for a few minutes. We'll leave right now." "See that you do," the guard continued, his voice carrying an edge of cruelty that made George's jaw tighten. "This is a family establishment, and we can't have people loitering who clearly don't belong here. It makes our real customers uncomfortable." Lily looked up at the security guard with confusion in her bright blue eyes. "We are a family," she said quietly. "Mama works 3 jobs. We're not bothering anybody." The guard's expression hardened. "Little girl, your mother needs to teach you that there are places for people like you, and this isn't one of them. Now gather your things and move along before I have to call the police." The notebook slipped from Lily's trembling hands, falling to the floor and scattering some of the loose pages where she had written her favorite song lyrics. As she bent to collect them, tears began streaming down her face, not from physical pain, but from the deep, cutting humiliation of being treated as if she were less than human. Amanda quickly gathered their few belongings, her hands shaking as she stuffed the $23.47 back into her worn purse. "Come on, Lily, let's go." But George Strait had seen enough. The man who had spent his entire career singing about family values, about treating people with dignity and respect, about standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves, felt something ignite in his chest. He removed his sunglasses and stood up from his own table, his 6-foot frame imposing despite his 71 years. "Excuse me, officer," George said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "Is there a problem?" "Here." The security guard turned, initially irritated by the interruption, but his expression quickly changed as he recognized the famous face beneath the Stetson hat. "Mr. Strait, I didn't realize, and I was just handling a situation with some people who were..." "Some people who were what?" George interrupted, his voice remaining calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. "A mother and daughter trying to stay warm on a cold December day, a little girl who was quietly singing my songs while her mother counted what looked like every dollar she has in the world." The security guard's face went pale. Around them, other shoppers had begun to notice the commotion, and several people were pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming a significant moment. George walked over to where Lily was still kneeling on the floor, trying to collect her scattered papers. He knelt down beside her, his knees protesting the movement, and began helping her gather the song lyrics that had spilled from her precious notebook. "Are these all my songs?" he asked gently, and Lily's head snapped up, her tear-filled eyes going wide with recognition and disbelief. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Lily Campbell stared at the face she had memorized from countless album covers, the face that smiled at her from the faded t-shirt she wore like armor against the world's cruelties. Her small mouth opened and closed several times, no sound emerging, as if her brain couldn't quite process that George Strait himself was kneeling on the cold mall floor beside her, carefully collecting the handwritten lyrics that represented her most precious possessions. You're really him," she whispered finally, her voice barely audible above the increasing murmur of curious shoppers who had begun to gather at a respectful distance. "You're really George Strait." George smiled, the same genuine smile that had charmed audiences for over 4 decades. "I sure am, sweetheart, and you must be one of my biggest fans, judging by all these songs you've written down." He held up a page covered in Lily's careful cursive handwriting, noting how she had drawn small hearts and stars in the margins around the words. "I know every single one," Lily said, her tears momentarily forgotten as wonder replaced devastation in her voice. "Mama says your songs helped her through the sad times after Daddy went to heaven. They help me too, especially when it gets scary at night." Something in the way she said those last words made George pause. He looked up at Amanda, who had been standing frozen in mortified silence, watching this surreal scene unfold. Her face was a mixture of gratitude, embarrassment, and something else, a mother's protective instinct warring with the knowledge that her daughter was experiencing what might be the most magical moment of her young life. "Mrs. George stood slowly, extending his hand to Amanda with the same respect he would show to any lady, regardless of her circumstances. "Campbell," Amanda managed, her voice shaking slightly as she accepted his handshake. "Amanda Campbell. And this is my daughter, Lily. Sir, I'm so sorry about all this commotion. We never intended to cause any trouble." "The only person who caused trouble here is that security guard," George said firmly, his voice carrying enough authority that the guard in question, who'd been hovering nearby looking increasingly uncomfortable, took a step backward. "And you, young lady," he continued, turning back to Lily, "have nothing to apologize for. Matter of fact, I think you and your mama just made my day a whole lot brighter." The crowd around them had grown larger, with people holding up phones to capture this unexpected encounter. George was accustomed to public attention, but he could see that Amanda was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the scrutiny. He made a decision that would surprise everyone present, including himself. "You know what?" George announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "I was just about to grab some lunch, and I hate eating alone. Would you ladies like to join me? I know a real nice place right here in the mall where they make the best chicken tenders in all of San Antonio." Lily's face lit up like the Christmas tree in the mall's center court. "Really? You want to have lunch with us?" "I can't think of anything I'd rather do," George replied honestly. He turned to Amanda, whose eyes had filled with tears for entirely different reasons now. "If that's all right with your mama, of course." Amanda looked at her daughter's radiant expression, then at the kind eyes of the man who had just turned what could have been the most humiliating day of their lives into something that felt like a miracle. "That's very generous of you, Mr. Strait, but we couldn't possibly—" "Now I insist," George interrupted gently. "Besides, this little lady and I have some serious talking to do about music. I noticed she's got some of my deeper cuts written down in that notebook of hers. That shows real dedication to the craft." As they walked toward the restaurant, George positioned himself between the Campbell family and the curious onlookers, using his body to shield them from the most intrusive phone cameras. The security guard who had started this entire incident trailed behind them at a distance, clearly unsure whether he should disappear entirely or somehow try to make amends for his earlier behavior. "Sir?" the guard called out tentatively as they reached the entrance to the upscale bistro George had chosen. "Mr. Strait, I want to apologize for any misunderstanding." George turned around slowly, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had grown up understanding the difference between right and wrong, between treating people with dignity and treating them as disposable. "What's your name, son?" George asked, though the guard was clearly at least 50 years old. "Peterson, sir. Dale Peterson. I've been working security here for 8 years and I've never had any complaints." "Well, you've got one now," George said firmly. "These ladies were minding their own business, not bothering a soul, and you treated them like criminals. That little girl was sitting quietly with her mother, singing my songs and dreaming big dreams, and you made her feel like she was worthless. That's not the kind of customer service I expect to see in a place where I spend my money." Dale Peterson's face had gone from pale to deep red. "Sir, I was just following mall policy about loitering." "Were they loitering, or were they taking a shelter?" George interrupted. "Were they causing problems, or were they just trying to stay warm on a cold day? And even if they were taking up space, is that any reason to humiliate a child and her mother in front of a crowd of strangers?" The gathering crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. This wasn't just a celebrity encounter anymore. It had become a teaching moment about human decency, delivered by someone whose platform gave his words real weight. "I want you to think real hard about how you treated this family today," George continued, "because I guarantee you, Mr. Peterson, that there are families just like the Campbells in every city in America. Good people who've hit hard times, who are doing their best to survive with dignity intact. And how we treat those people when they're at their lowest point says everything about who we really are." Lily had been listening to this exchange with wide eyes, her small hand clasped tightly in her mother's. She had never heard anyone defend her and her mama with such passion, such conviction. In her 8 years of life, she had grown accustomed to being looked at with pity at best, contempt at worst. But here was her hero, the man whose voice had carried her through the darkest nights, standing up for her as if she were the most important person in the world. "Now," George said, his tone softening as he turned back to Amanda and Lily, "I believe we have a lunch reservation to keep." The bistro manager, who had been watching the entire scene unfold from behind the hostess station, immediately stepped forward with a warm smile. "Mr. Strait, we have your usual table ready whenever you are." The nines, as they were seated at a corner booth that offered both privacy and a view of the mall's central court, George couldn't help but notice how Amanda's hands trembled slightly as she opened her menu. He had seen that kind of nervousness before, the anxiety of someone who rarely had the luxury of choosing what to eat rather than simply being grateful for whatever food was available. "Order anything you want," George said gently. "Everything here is delicious, but I have to recommend the chicken and waffles. It's not exactly health food, but sometimes a person needs a little comfort on their plate." Lily looked up from her menu with curiosity. "What's chicken and waffles? Is it breakfast or lunch?" George laughed, a rich, warm sound that seemed to ease some of the tension Amanda had been carrying in her shoulders. "Well now, that's one of life's great mysteries, isn't it? I suppose it's whatever you want it to be, kind of like music. It doesn't have to fit into just one category to be exactly what you need when you need it." As they waited for their food to arrive, George found himself genuinely interested in learning more about these two remarkable people who had wandered into his afternoon. There was something about Lily's resilience, about the way she had maintained her love for music despite everything she had endured, that reminded him of his own childhood struggles and the power that songs had held for him during difficult times. "Tell me about your daddy," George said softly to Lily, noticing how Amanda's expression grew somber at the mention. "Your mama mentioned he's in heaven now." Lily's face grew serious, but she didn't shy away from the question. "Daddy was a soldier. He fought in the war. But when he came home, he was different. Mama says he had invisible wounds that hurt his heart and his mind. He used to play your songs on his guitar and sing them to me before bedtime." Amanda's eyes filled with tears, but she managed a small smile. "James was a beautiful singer. He said your music reminded him of home, of the values he was fighting to protect. Even when the nightmares got bad, he could still find peace in those songs." George felt his own throat tighten with emotion. This was why he had spent his life making music, not just for the awards or the sold-out arenas, but for moments like these, when songs became lifelines for people who needed them most. The waitress arrived with their food, and George watched as Lily's eyes widened at the sight of the golden chicken and fluffy waffles on her plate. It had clearly been a long time since she had seen a meal this generous, and she looked to her mother for permission before picking up her fork. "Go ahead, sweetheart," Amanda whispered, though George could see her own restraint as she carefully cut her sandwich into small portions, the habit of someone who had learned to make food last as long as possible. As they ate, George gently encouraged Lily to tell him more about her favorite songs, and he was amazed by the depth of her understanding. This wasn't just a child who liked catchy melodies. She genuinely connected with the stories within the music, the emotions and experiences that he had woven into each composition. "The one about crossing your heart," Lily said between bites. "That's my favorite, because Daddy used to say that to Mama every night before he went to sleep. He would cross his heart and promise that everything would be okay, even when the nightmares made him scared." Amanda's fork paused halfway to her mouth, and George could see the weight of memory settling over her features. He had written that song thinking about promises and commitment, but hearing it through the lens of this family's experience gave it entirely new meaning. "Your daddy sounds like he was a good man," George said quietly. "What branch of the military did he serve in?" "Army," Amanda replied, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened. 3 tours overseas. He came back different each time, but he tried so hard to be the husband and father we needed. The doctors called it post-traumatic stress, but James called it carrying too much weight in his heart. George nodded with understanding. He had performed for military audiences countless times over the years, had seen firsthand the toll that service could take on good men and women who sacrificed pieces of themselves for their country's safety. "When he passed last year," Amanda continued, "we lost everything pretty quickly. The medical bills from his treatment, the funeral costs, and then I couldn't keep up with the mortgage working just one job. I tried everything, took on extra shifts, sold everything we owned that had any value, but it wasn't enough. Mama works at 3 different places now," Lily added proudly, though her innocence prevented her from fully understanding the desperation behind her mother's schedule. "She cleans offices at night, serves breakfast at the diner in the morning, and stocks shelves at the grocery store in between. Sometimes I get to go with her to the diner, and the cook lets me help make pancakes." George's heart ached as he began to piece together the full picture of their daily struggle. Amanda was working herself to exhaustion, juggling multiple minimum-wage jobs while trying to care for her daughter and maintain some semblance of stability in their chaotic existence. "Where are you ladies staying now?" George asked gently, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Amanda's cheeks flushed with shame. "We're between places right now, staying with friends when we can, or..." She trailed off, unable to say the words in front of her daughter. "We live in our car," Lily said matter-of-factly, apparently unaware that this was something to be embarrassed about. It's kind of like camping every night, except we get to see different parking lots. Mama lets me pick the radio station before we go to sleep, and we always listen to your songs." The simple honesty of that statement hit George like a physical blow. Here was a child who had been reduced to homelessness, sleeping in a car through the Texas winter, and she was finding ways to make it sound like an adventure. The resilience was both inspiring and heartbreaking. "The car radio works?" George asked, grasping for something positive in this devastating revelation. "Sometimes," Amanda said with a slight smile. "It's an old battery-powered radio we keep, charged at whatever job site has an outlet. Music is about the only luxury we have left, but it's one I wasn't willing to give up. James always said that music was food for the soul, and some days that's the only nourishment we get." George excused himself from the table, telling Amanda and Lily that he needed to make a quick phone call. As he walked toward the restaurant's quieter back section, his mind was racing with possibilities. He had built his entire career on the foundation of family values, on songs that celebrated the strength and dignity of working people. Now he was faced with a real family that embodied those values, despite facing circumstances that would break many people's spirits. He dialed his longtime manager and friend Tom Patterson, who answered on the second ring. "George, what's going on? You sound different." "Tom, I need you to listen carefully because I'm about to ask you to help me do something that might sound crazy, but it's the most important thing I've done in years." Over the next 10 minutes, George explained the situation with Amanda and Lily Campbell, describing not just their circumstances, but the profound impact their story had on him. Tom had worked with George long enough to know when the singer was truly moved by something, and this conversation carried a weight that transcended typical charitable impulses. "What do you need me to do?" Tom asked without hesitation. "First, I want you to call Sarah Martinez at the label. She's always looking for good administrative help, and I think Amanda Campbell might be exactly what she needs. The woman's been juggling 3 jobs and managing to keep her daughter fed, clothed, and hopeful. That takes organizational skills most people don't possess." "Consider it done. What else?" "I want you to reach out to Mike Henderson at the apartment complex, near the label offices, the nice family place with the playground. Tell him I need a 2-bedroom unit, fully furnished, available immediately. I'll cover the deposit and first year's rent." Tom whistled softly. "George, you barely know these people. Are you sure about this?" George looked back toward the table, where Lily was showing her mother something in her notebook, both of them smiling genuinely for what might have been the first time in months. "Tom, I've been singing about family and community and helping your neighbors for 40 years. If I can't live up to those words, when I'm presented with people who actually need help, then what's the point of any of it? And there's one more thing," George continued. "I want to set up an education fund for the little girl. Her father died serving our country, and she's got a love for music that reminds me of myself at that age. I want to make sure she has opportunities that her circumstances might otherwise deny her." When George returned to the table, he found Lily carefully copying something from her notebook onto a clean napkin. She looked up at him with excitement. "Mr. Strait, I wrote down the words to my favorite part of one of your songs. The part about keeping promises and always being there for people you love. Would you sign it for me?" George took the napkin and read the carefully written lines. The words were his, but seeing them in this child's handwriting, understanding what they meant to her family, transformed them into something more powerful than he had ever intended. "I'll do better than sign it," George said, pulling out his own pen. "I'm going to make a promise of my own, right here next to these words." As he wrote, Amanda watched with growing curiosity. When he handed the napkin back to Lily, both mother and daughter read the message he had added. "To Lily Campbell, your daddy would be proud of the strong, kind girl you've become. Some promises are too important to wait. Your friend always, George Strait. I don't understand, Amanda said softly, though something in George's expression suggested that understanding was about to come. George reached across the table and took both of Amanda's hands in his. Mrs. Campbell, I want you to know that your troubles aren't over. Nobody can promise that life won't bring more challenges. But starting tomorrow, you and Lily are going to have a foundation to build from, a safe place to call home, steady work that uses your skills and pays you what you're worth, and resources to help Lily pursue her dreams. Amanda's eyes filled with tears as the full meaning of his words began to sink in. Mr. Strait, I can't possibly accept— You're not accepting charity, George interrupted firmly. You're accepting a hand up from someone who recognizes strength and character when he sees it. Your husband served his country, you've been serving your family, and now it's time for someone to serve you both. Lily looked between the two adults, sensing that something monumental was happening but not quite grasping the details. Does this mean we don't have to sleep in the car anymore? George smiled at her, feeling more certain about this decision than he had about anything in years. Sweetheart, you're never going to have to sleep in a car again, and that's a promise I'm crossing my heart to make. Amanda's composure finally cracked completely. Tears that she had been holding back for months, maybe years, came pouring out in great, shuddering sobs that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul. She covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed by a mixture of relief, gratitude, and the kind of desperate hope that she had trained herself not to feel because disappointment had become too painful to bear. "Mama, why are you crying?" Lily asked with concern, reaching across the table to pat her mother's arm. "Did Mr. Strait say something sad?" "No, baby," Amanda managed between sobs. "These are happy tears, the happiest tears Mama has cried in a very long time." George signaled the waitress for some tissues and waited patiently for Amanda to collect herself. He understood that this kind of emotional release was necessary. The woman had been carrying an impossible burden for so long that the sudden prospect of relief was almost harder to process than the original trauma had been. "I need you to understand something, Mrs. Campbell," George said, when Amanda had recovered enough to meet his eyes. "This isn't pity, and it's not charity in the way most people think of it. What I see when I look at your family is everything that's right about this country. You've faced losses that would destroy many people, but you've kept fighting, kept your dignity, and most importantly, you've raised a daughter who still believes in goodness and possibility despite everything she's witnessed." He pulled out his phone and showed Amanda a text message that had just arrived from his manager. "Tom has already spoken with Sarah Martinez at MCA Records. She runs our administrative operations, and she's been looking for someone with strong organizational skills and the ability to work independently. Based on what I've told her about how you've managed to coordinate 3 different work schedules while caring for Lily, she wants to meet with you tomorrow morning." Amanda stared at the phone screen, reading the message that offered her an interview for a position with full benefits, regular hours, and a salary that was more than she currently made working 3 jobs combined. "The apartment complex is called Sunrise Gardens," George continued, showing her another message with photos of a bright, clean 2-bedroom unit. "It's about 10 minutes from the record label offices, and it has a playground where Lily can make friends with other children. The unit comes furnished, so you won't need to worry about buying furniture or household items." Lily had been listening to this conversation with growing excitement, though she didn't fully comprehend the magnitude of what was being offered. "Does that mean I can have my own bed? And we can listen to music as loud as we want, without worrying about bothering people in other cars?" "It means exactly that," George laughed, delighted by her priorities. "And it means your mama won't have to work 3 jobs anymore, which gives her more time to spend with you." As word of what was happening at their table spread through the restaurant, other diners had begun to take notice. Several people were discreetly recording with their phones, and George could see the manager hovering nearby, clearly torn between respecting his famous customer's privacy and managing the growing attention from other patrons. "Mr. Strait?" The voice belonged to Dale Peterson, the security guard who had started this entire chain of events. He approached the table tentatively, his earlier arrogance completely replaced by what appeared to be genuine remorse. "I wonder if I could have—" "A word with you, sir." George looked at Amanda and Lily, then back at the security guard. "I think anything you need to say can be said in front of these ladies, considering they were the ones you mistreated." Peterson's face reddened, but he maintained eye contact with George. "You're absolutely right, sir. Mrs. Campbell, young lady, I owe you both a sincere apology. I was completely out of line earlier, and there's no excuse for how I treated you. I let my assumptions cloud my judgment, and I forgot that every person who walks through this mall deserves to be treated with respect." He turned to Amanda specifically. "Ma'am, I want you to know that I've spoken with mall management, and we're going to be implementing new training protocols for all security staff about how to handle situations involving families who might be experiencing hard times. What happened to you and your daughter should never happen to anyone else." Amanda looked surprised by the genuineness of his apology. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I appreciate you saying that. There's something else," Peterson continued, reaching into his wallet. He pulled out a $50 bill and placed it on the table in front of Lily. "This is for you, young lady. Not because I think money can fix what I did, but because I want you to have something that comes from kindness instead of cruelty. Maybe you can buy yourself something that makes you happy." Lily looked at the money with wide eyes, then at her mother for guidance. Amanda nodded, and Lily carefully picked up the bill. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," Lily said with the natural grace that children often possess. "I forgive you for being mean earlier. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, just like kids do." The simplicity and sincerity of her forgiveness seemed to affect the security guard more deeply than any lecture could have. Peterson's eyes filled with tears as he looked at this remarkable child who had just taught him more about grace and mercy than he had learned in 53 years of life. "You're a special little girl," Peterson said softly. "Your parents raised you right." As Peterson walked away, George noticed that several other customers had been watching the exchange with obvious interest. An elderly woman from a nearby table approached them, followed by a young couple with 2 small children. "Excuse me?" the elderly woman said, addressing Amanda directly. "I couldn't help but overhear some of what's been happening here today. I'm Margaret Thompson, and I just wanted to tell you that your little girl is absolutely precious. The way she's handled this whole situation with such grace and maturity is remarkable." The young couple nodded in agreement. "We have kids about her age," the woman said, "and we were both so impressed by how polite and well-behaved she's been, even when that security guard was being inappropriate. You should be very proud of the daughter you're raising." More people began to approach their table, each wanting to share words of encouragement or support. George watched as Amanda's posture gradually changed from defensive and ashamed to surprised and then genuinely touched by the outpouring of kindness from complete strangers. A teenage girl who had been watching from across the food court walked over with a shy smile. "Are you really George Strait?" she asked. When George nodded, she continued, "My grandmother is your biggest fan. She's 92 years old and lives in a nursing home about 20 minutes from here. She always talks about how much your music means to her, especially the songs about family and staying strong through hard times." "What's your grandmother's name?" George asked. "Rose Patterson. She used to be Rose Mitchell before she got married. She grew up on a farm in Fredericksburg and says your songs remind her of the values her parents taught her." George smiled and pulled out his phone. "Would your grandmother like a video message from me? I'd be happy to record something personal for her." The teenager's face lit up with excitement. Oh my gosh, she would absolutely die. In a good way. I mean, as George recorded a heartfelt message for Rose Patterson, Lily watched with fascination. Here was her hero, taking time to bring joy to an elderly woman he had never met, simply because it was the right thing to do. The lesson wasn't lost on her. True kindness extends beyond grand gestures to include small acts of thoughtfulness that cost nothing but time and attention. "Mr. Strait," Lily said when he finished recording the video, "are all famous people as nice as you?" George chuckled at the question's innocence. "Well, sweetheart, being famous doesn't automatically make someone nice or mean. But I've learned that the more blessings you receive in life, the more important it becomes to share those blessings with others. Success means nothing if you can't use it to help people who need help." He looked around the restaurant, noticing how the atmosphere had shifted from curious observation to something warmer and more communal. Complete strangers were talking to each other about kindness and community, sharing stories about times when they had needed help or times when they had been able to help others. "You know what I think happened here today?" George said to Amanda and Lily. "I think we reminded a whole bunch of people about something they already knew but maybe had forgotten. That we're all in this life together, and when we take care of each other, everybody benefits." Amanda wiped away fresh tears. But these were tears of joy rather than despair. "Mr. Strait, I don't know how we'll ever be able to thank you properly for what you've done for us today." "You don't need to thank me," George replied firmly. "You just need to take these opportunities and build the best life you can for yourself and Lily. And someday, when you're in a position to help someone else who's struggling, you'll pass that kindness forward. That's how it works. Not because people owe each other, but because helping each other is what makes us human." As they prepared to leave the restaurant, George's phone buzzed with another message from his manager. Tom had been busy making arrangements, and everything was falling into place even faster than George had hoped. "Mrs. Campbell," George said, reading the message, "your interview tomorrow is at 10 in the morning. Tom will pick you up at 9:30 from wherever you spent the night, and after the interview, he'll take you to see the apartment. If everything goes well with Sarah Martinez, and I'm confident it will, you could be sleeping in your own home tomorrow night." The magnitude of this transformation was almost too much for Amanda to process. 24 hours ago, she had been counting $23.47, while her daughter sang quietly to herself in a corner booth, both of them just trying to stay warm and invisible. Now they were looking at the possibility of stability, security, and hope for the future. 1 week later, Amanda Campbell stood in the kitchen of her new apartment, watching through the window as Lily played on the playground with 3 other children she had already befriended. The morning sun streamed through clean windows, illuminating a space that truly belonged to them. The first home they had been able to call their own since James's death. The job interview with Sarah Martinez had gone even better than George had predicted. Not only did Amanda's organizational skills and work ethic impress the label executive, but her personal story and resilience had convinced Sarah that she would be an invaluable addition to their team. Amanda now worked as the administrative coordinator for MCA Records' community outreach programs, a position that allowed her to use her experiences to help connect the label with charitable organizations and community initiatives. "It's perfect," Sarah had told George after the interview. "She understands what it means to struggle, which makes her the ideal person to help us identify and support causes that actually make a difference in people's lives." The apartment had exceeded even Lily's wildest dreams. Her bedroom had a window that looked out over the playground, and she had spent hours arranging her few possessions in the space that was entirely her own. The notebook with George's songs held the place of honor on her small desk, where she continued to copy lyrics and write her own thoughts about the music that had carried her through the darkest period of her young life. But perhaps the most significant change was in Amanda herself. The constant tension that had defined her features for months had gradually faded, replaced by something that looked remarkably like peace. She slept through the night without waking, up to check that the car doors were locked, without listening for the sounds that might indicate they needed to move to a different location. For the first time since James's death, she could plan beyond the next day, the next meal, the next place to sleep. "Mama, guess what?" Lily burst through the apartment door, her cheeks flushed with excitement from playing outside. "Mrs. Rodriguez from apartment 12 used to be a music teacher, and she said she'd like to give me piano lessons if you think it's okay." Amanda smiled, marveling at how quickly Lily had adapted to having neighbors, friends, and the kind of stability that allowed for activities like music lessons. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. We'll talk to Mrs. Rodriguez about it this weekend." The phone rang, and Amanda recognized the number immediately. George had called several times during the week, checking on their adjustment to their new life and making sure they had everything they needed. "Hello, Mr. Strait," Amanda answered, unable to keep the warmth from her voice. "Amanda, how many times do I have to tell you to call me George?" He laughed. "How are you ladies settling in?" "Better than I could have ever imagined. Lily has made friends with half the kids in the complex, and my supervisor at work says I'm already making a real difference in how they evaluate potential community partnerships." "That's wonderful to hear. And speaking of making a difference, I have something special I'd like to discuss with you both. Are you free this Saturday evening?" Amanda felt a flutter of curiosity mixed with slight anxiety. George had already done so much for them that she couldn't imagine what else he might have planned. "Of course. What did you have in mind?" "Well, I'm performing at the Majestic Theater here in San Antonio this Saturday night. It's a special benefit concert for military families, and I was wondering if you and Lily would like to be my guests. I know she's never been to a live concert, and I thought it might be nice for her to see what all those songs in her notebook sound like when they're performed for a real audience." Amanda's breath caught in her throat. Lily had dreamed of seeing George Strait perform live since she was old enough to understand what concerts were, but tickets to his shows were expensive and difficult to obtain. The idea that she might actually get to experience that magic was almost too wonderful to believe. "Are you sure? That's incredibly generous, but we wouldn't want to impose." "Amanda," George interrupted gently, "you're not imposing. You're my friends, and I want to share this with you. Besides, I have a feeling that having you both there will make the performance even more meaningful for me." Saturday evening arrived with perfect Texas weather, warm enough to be comfortable, but cool enough to remind everyone that December was still December. Amanda had used part of her first paycheck to buy Lily a new dress for the concert, a simple blue outfit that made her daughter's eyes shine with happiness. The Majestic Theater was everything Lily had imagined and more. The ornate ceiling, the blush-red seats, and the sense of anticipation that filled the air as hundreds of people waited for the show to begin created an atmosphere of magic that had her bouncing with excitement. "Mama, I can't believe we're really here," Lily whispered as they were escorted to their seats in the third row. "I can't believe Mr. George invited us to see him sing all our favorite songs." When the lights dimmed and George walked onto the stage, the audience erupted in applause. But as his eyes found Amanda and Lily in the crowd, his smile became more personal, more intimate, as if he were performing just for them. The concert was everything Amanda had hoped it would be, and more. George's voice filled the theater with the warmth and authenticity that had made him a legend, and each song seemed to tell a story that resonated with the audience's own experiences. When he performed the ballads about love and loss, Amanda thought about James and felt a sense of closure that had been missing from her grief. When he sang about perseverance and hope, she looked at Lily and felt grateful for the strength that had carried them through their darkest days. Halfway through the concert, George paused to address the audience. "Tonight's show is dedicated to our military families," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the theatre. "I want to take a moment to acknowledge the sacrifices made not just by our service members, but by their families who support them, worry about them, and sometimes have to learn to live without them." He looked directly at Amanda and Lily as he continued, "I recently met a young lady who lost her father, a veteran who served our country with honor. This little girl and her mother have shown me what real courage looks like. The kind of courage it takes to keep going when everything seems impossible, to find hope in the darkest places, and to believe in the power of music to heal and inspire." But then the spotlight found Amanda and Lily in the audience, and Amanda felt her cheeks flush as hundreds of people turned to look at them. But instead of the shame and humiliation she had felt in the mall, she felt surrounded by warmth and acceptance. "Lily Campbell," George said, "would you like to come up here and help me with the next song?" Lily's eyes went wide with shock and delight. She looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly, then made her way to the stage with the assistance of a theatre employee. George knelt down to Lily's eye level as she joined him on stage. "Are you ready to sing with me?" he asked softly, his microphone picking up the question so the audience could hear. "Yes, sir," Lily replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. George stood and addressed the audience one more time. "This next song is about promises, about commitment, and about the love that holds families together even when they face impossible challenges. I'd like to dedicate it to James Campbell, who served his country with honor, and to his wife and daughter, who continue to honor his memory every day." As the opening notes of the song filled the theater, George began to sing, his voice carrying the weight of emotion that only comes from truly understanding the lyrics. When he reached the chorus, he held the microphone so that Lily could sing along, her sweet, clear voice blending with his in a moment of pure magic. The audience was completely silent, transfixed by the sight of this country music legend sharing his stage with a young girl whose story had touched his heart. When the song ended, the applause was thunderous, but George and Lily seemed to exist in their own bubble of connection and joy. "Thank you, Miss Lily," George said, giving her a gentle hug before she returned to her seat. "That was the most beautiful duet I've ever performed." As the concert continued, Amanda found herself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a widow, struggling to feed her daughter and keep a roof over their heads. Tonight, she was watching that same daughter fulfill a dream that had seemed impossible, surrounded by people who saw her not as a charity case, but as a human being worthy of kindness and respect. When the final song ended and the curtain fell, George made his way to where Amanda and Lily were sitting. The theatre was still buzzing with excitement from the performance, but his attention was focused entirely on them. "How did that feel?" he asked Lily, who was still glowing with the excitement of her stage debut. "Like magic," she replied honestly. "Like all the songs in my notebook came to life at the same time." George laughed, delighted by her description. "That's exactly what music should feel like. And you know what? I have a feeling this won't be the last time you perform on a stage. You've got a gift, young lady, and with the right training and opportunities, there's no limit to what you can accomplish." As they prepared to leave the theatre, George pulled Amanda aside for a private conversation. "I want you to know that everything we've set up for you and Lily is permanent," he said quietly. "The job, the apartment, the education fund, none of it is dependent on maintaining a relationship with me. You've earned these opportunities through your own strength and character, and they belong to you regardless of what happens in the future. Amanda felt tears threaten once again, but these were tears of gratitude rather than despair. George, I don't think I'll ever be able to adequately express what you've done for us. You gave us back our lives, our hope, our future. No, George, corrected gently. I just gave you a platform to build on. Everything else, the courage, the determination, the love between you and Lily, that was already there. All I did was remove some of the obstacles that were preventing you from using those gifts. As they walked out of the theater into the warm Texas night, Lily slipped her hand into George's. Mr. George, will you always be our friend? Always, George promised, squeezing her small hand gently. No matter where life takes any of us, we'll always be connected by the music and the memories we've shared. 6 months later, Amanda received a promotion at work, recognizing her exceptional contributions to the label's community outreach programs. Lily had started piano lessons and was already showing remarkable talent, inheriting her father's musical abilities and her mother's determination to excel. The notebook that had once contained only copied lyrics now included original songs that Lily had written, inspired by her experiences and her dreams for the future. And sometimes, on quiet Sunday afternoons, George would stop by their apartment for coffee and conversation, listening to Lily play her latest compositions and marveling at how far they had all come from that cold December day in the mall when a chance encounter had reminded him why he had chosen to make music his life's work. The story of George Strait and the Campbell family became legend in San Antonio, a testament to the power of kindness, the importance of dignity, and the truth that sometimes the most extraordinary changes begin with the simplest acts of human compassion.